your suya needs from multiple locations across the GTA, including Scarborough, Toronto, Woodbridge, and Mississauga. Also located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Visit any location today or stay home and order through
DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Skip the Dishes.
For more information, check out our website at www.thesuyaspot.com or call the toll-free line at +1 866 448 7892. The Suya Spot. You built it, now use it. Vous l'avez construit, utilisez-le.
Hallelujah. We just want to worship you, Yahweh. You are God. You are all by yourself. I am that I am. Hallelujah.
You are God. From beginning to the end, there is no place for argument. You are God all by yourself. You are God from beginning to the end. There is no place for argument. You are God all by yourself. You are God from beginning to the end. There is no place for argument. You are God all by yourself. You are God. No place for argument. You are God all by yourself. Holy are you, God. From beginning to the end. There is no place for argument. You are God all by yourself. My life is not my own. To you I belong. I give myself to you. My life is not my own. To you I belong. I give myself to you. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. Give myself away. I give myself away, oh God. Give myself away so you can use me for your glory. You are God by yourself. You are God, you are God. All I need is you, Lord. Is you, Lord. All I need is you, Lord. All I need is you, Lord. Is you,
can't do nothing without you, Lord. Use me for your glory. Need more of you, more of you, more of you, Lord. We bow down and worship Yahweh. We bow down and worship Yahweh. Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. Oh, Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. We bow down and worship Yahweh, Yahweh. We bow before your throne and worship Yahweh, 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 Yahweh. Yahweh, Yahweh, worship your majesty, Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. Father, we bow before your throne. Join the host of angels as we worship you. Yahweh, take all the glory, take all the honor, take all the praise, take all our worship. Yahweh, Yahweh, we bow before your throne. We long for you more of you, Lord. To worship you I live, to worship you I live to worship you. To worship you I live, to worship you I live to worship you. Oh, thank you, God. Oh, King of glory. Oh, help me sing. Oh, I worship you, worship you. Somebody worship him, worship him, worship him. You deserve all the glory. You deserve all the honor. Oh, in you I live, I move, I have my being. Oh, you're my light. You're the light. You're the light. You're the light. You're the light. Worship you. Oh.
Yo eduki to kwaba mandole to yi to deba otuni kwaba dolevo eboni mayaga eduki evyo babu yakara gawe to deba otuni kwaba dolevo
edoni rowaya kebe to mege nirisi wakimasi esire neto menjagama wako waga foma agizoso o waga mama e anaporubo uteno mono baburo wakima ya mwese wakima ko bokwe na ya joledo manji e ko waga foma agizoso o waga mama e anaporubo wani nego ko wani ne mata o wagamu imuna boyedo no kwizozo sijo wayani ne igo ke wayani ne mata o waga mama ogweke ne mose imuna garedo e moizozo imuna garoba ogweke ne morise
iko yere na se kekebe Kwaya miri ukusa Ogogogo ni magamie Imamie boni ya gedo Yano lega edo ereko Imotano kawe kerdoye Ebo nagiso bomeria Oya yasi wama na yidiani yesige
Iveto menu zomo Iveto meni lebinu Iveto meni lebinu Waya radio teto Adogwa badele doyi Oba menu mogun Oba menu mogun Oba menu mogun Egwaro gidiga Ambassador Norioba His Excellency Norioba o Turato Boba, Urape Boba o, Nutiamo Tokia, Oba no enebe, Oba nebo, Imayanga Oedo, Timari Tivieto, Ivieto Yanira America, Ivieto ni Canada, Ivieto ni UK, Ivieto ni Euro, Waya Radio Tedo, Wado Boba Doledo yi.
Ebony Maya yo eduki to kwaba mandole to yi to deba otuni kwaba dolevo
Ebony Mayaga Edubi Evyo Babu Yakara Gamuwe Do de Bautuni Kwaba Dolevo
Wede Bausunobu Nakwa Bawa Doledo yi Wa madore o Edori si agbon o Atemi vie Eran kewona Edo Mose Edo Yeme o Edori si agbon o Ọmọ náà bá ẹwà rẹ̀ ò gidi gan ọ̀sẹ̀ ẹ̀dọ́ kòkó ọ̀sìn máa kòkó ọba dò gbòrìrì.
ẹ̀dọ̀ ẹ̀nà wùwà wàrí ìdàrẹ o wàrẹ́ ilẹ̀ o wàgbọ̀mọ́gbọ́ bá dọ́là dọ́nà yìí ó wà níbú wọ pẹ́sẹ̀ kékeré bóso níbú èyí kì í towí tó wà alẹ́ ṣe yàrá rẹ̀ nìran yàrá sọ̀wọ́ bò ìran níbú ìyàwó ìyàrí ìyàtọ̀ èso ra yàrá dùn ẹ̀gán èso ra sọ̀kú mẹ́nẹ́mẹ́nẹ́ ìyàwó ẹ̀dẹ̀ nọ̀rọ̀ àsunú wọnà rí i gbogbo tó fi àbọ̀ wàrẹ́ rí ilẹ̀ o wàgẹ̀ máa gbọ́ bá dọ́là jọ̀nà yìí wàrẹ́ rí mú ẹwẹ́ gbẹ́sẹ̀ kò tàrí ẹwọ́ ìbò mẹ́rin èèmọ̀ ní ẹ̀yàrí ìwà ó wẹ̀rí ìwà ó ta adéhùrà yẹwé bo owó gbọ́lódé wọn ta lóyún agbára tí ó sọ́mẹ̀ lọ́mọrí yàrá ìyá ẹ̀ kù wọn ni ìyẹn ẹ̀ máa yẹ ọ̀nà àmúwọ́ rẹ̀ wàrẹ́ rí ilẹ̀ o wàgẹ̀ máa gbọ́ bá dọ́là jọ̀nà yìí.
Ebony Mayayo Edubi Gbogbo ọba máa tọ́lẹ̀ tó yí Lóde Bautuni Kwaba Dolevo Ebony Mayaga Edubi Evyo Babu Yakara Gamuwe Lóde Bautuni Kwaba Dolevo
Good afternoon, live from Toronto on the GBKM network. This is the Chat Up Show, the show where we catch you up with the chat up of our weekly headlines. I'm your host, Elizabeth Eloidy, and I hope that you are ready to chat it up with me today. Now, as always, you know you can keep up with the GBKM network in various ways. You can listen and watch live 24/7 at www.gbkm.tv or www.gbkm.fm, where you can also catch up on any past shows you may have missed, check out our upcoming show schedule, like, share, comment, all of that good stuff. Also, you can download our free app by just searching GBKM in the App Store or the Google Play Store. This free app is available for all iOS and Android devices. Now, what's really great about our app is that anytime we go live, you will be notified. So you can take us on the go and we'll let you know as soon as we go live so you won't have to miss a show. And if you do happen to miss a show, no worries. Everything that's available on our web radio and TV station is available on the app. So you can watch live 24/7, listen live 24/7, catch up on past shows, check out our upcoming show schedule, like, share, comment, all of that great stuff. You can also continue to watch us and tune in on Facebook and YouTube at GBKM Network, as well as on Instagram and Twitter at GBKM Network, where we'll give you updates on what's going on right here at GBKM. Now with that, we have some updates on what's going on for us right here in Ontario and then at large in Canada. So first off, in our province of Ontario, the government has officially launched its COVID-19 vaccine verification app and QR code system. Now, this was something that we've been talking about once the idea of vaccine verification was coming up, and we know already that in certain establishments we need to show proof of vaccination to be allowed entry and to remain on the premises inside at least. Now with this app, it is available now to download for all ages, and it is called Verify Ontario. So you can search that right now on your iOS or Android device, called Verify Ontario, that you can download for free right now. So as I mentioned, we know since September 22nd, residents of the province have needed proof of vaccination to visit some non-essential businesses and services in Ontario. And for nearly a month now, that's been our new normal, if you will, that now when we go into restaurants to eat inside, into gyms, into cinemas and bars, we know that we need to bring our proof of vaccination along with us. Now, currently, or before this app was launched, we were using our vaccine receipt or proof of vaccination that we received once we got vaccinated. But now, with this app, you won't need to take that piece of paper around with you. You'll just have all the information available on the app. So how exactly will this new enhanced vaccine certificate work? So this is essentially a scannable QR code that contains only essential information and does not include health card numbers. So it's like, you know, those like fuzzy things that we see around that has all the information. You take a picture of it. Over the last year or so, certain establishments have had it to check out the menu or to scan for contact COVID-19. That's the similar technology, is that now it will be scannable once you go to these certain establishments. Instead of having to show the actual physical proof of vaccination, instead they will scan this code that has all the necessary information, excluding health card numbers. Now, people will also need to show a proof of ID alongside the QR code. So what we were doing before with our proof of vaccination receipts, now you still need to show a piece of ID just to prove that you are the same person that is showing up in the system. So how will the new Verify Ontario app for businesses work? Now on the business end, this is a free QR code scanner. There is for businesses to use that they can use to scan QR codes on the enhanced vaccine certificates. Now the app can't store any personal information. So no worries, they're not scanning your personal information to then keep it from you. It's just to check up on whether you are vaccinated properly or to the degree that is required to be within these establishments. Businesses and organizations can download the free app from the App Store or the Google Play Store, and it's available in both French and English. It can be used without an internet connection, and it can scan both digital and printed versions of the enhanced vaccine certificate. So if you're thinking, oh, I don't want to be, you know, putting my information on this QR code scanning or verifier for whatever reason, you can still use your physical vaccine proof of vaccination copy as well, which they will then be able to scan too at these businesses. The app will show businesses a check mark or an X to confirm vaccination status. Now, do you need a cell phone or computer to use the system? Of course, since it's an app, the province says that it can be printed or downloaded. So once you get the enhanced vaccine verification or certificate, you can download and print that for yourself. So now on the screen, you can check out where you can go to be able to download the app on the ontario.ca website. It's called the Verify Ontario mobile app, which you can be used for proof of vaccination at entry and for businesses to scan as well, proof of vaccination upon entry. So if you want to find the app, you can go to the ontario.ca website, just pulling that up again for you, just to make sure that you can get what you need. And if anything, you could just you can just search, in the Google Play Store or the App Store for the Verify Ontario app, and it will be right there, free to download. Pretty simple to download. So another question that pops up is, what if I can't access the Ontario vaccine portal? Now, if this is the case, anyone who can't access the portal, including those only with only an Ontario red and white health card, you can call the Provincial Vaccine Contact Center at 1-833-943-3900 to have their enhanced vaccine certificate emailed or mailed to them, or to you if you're in search of that. So that's a way. If you are not able to access the Ontario vaccine portal, you can call
in to be able to receive that the verification certificate. People without an Ontario health card can still contact their public health unit to have their identity verified and get a COVID ID as well, which you can then also use instead. Now, once you get the ID, you can call the phone number above that I mentioned before, the 1-833-943-3900. And if someone does not have an access to a printer, you can get a copy printed for free at a local library or at Service Ontario location. Ontario residents who received their first or second dose out of the province can also contact their public health unit to record their information and receive an Ontario receipt specifically for the province. So those are just some things to clear up some questions that may arise with this new form of technology in our lives. Now, does this certificate work for people with only one vaccine dose? Now, the QR code, when scanned, will not generate approval or a check mark if the individual is not yet fully vaccinated. So if you only have one dose, this proof of verification certificate will not work for you and will not give you the response you want once checked at a business or organization or establishment. So you want to make sure that you are fully vaccinated. Will you be able to use the QR code for medical exemptions? The province says work is underway to integrate medical and clinical exemptions into vaccine certificates with QR codes. Currently, people who cannot take a vaccine, of course, as we know, due to medical reasons, can present a note from a medical doctor or registered nurse to prove that they are exempted from taking the vaccine or from being fully vaccinated. So for now, you'll still need to carry that note with you when you are entering these businesses and establishments until the government works on something or the province works on something that can integrate that into the new QR code system that we have. Now, can you still use the vaccine receipt? Yes, you can. You can continue to use the current vaccine receipt if you prefer that. Businesses are required to accept that as proof of vaccination. As I mentioned before, they can also scan that as well if you do not have the QR code from the app. However, you cannot no longer download the receipts off the province's online portal. So that is the catch, that if you already have yours downloaded and printed off and you already have it easily accessible, you can continue to use that. But if you haven't downloaded yours yet, you can no longer download these receipts off the province's online portal. And those are instead, of course, you'd probably have to just download the app and use that as your verification. So those are some of your pandemic updates for now. Of course, we'll always keep you updated on the GBKM network. So for now, for those who have been waiting for the app, it's available to download and has been for some time now. And so you can go ahead and download that from the App Store or the Google Play Store. It's the before I tell you the wrong name, the Ontario Vaccine, Verify Ontario app, that's it. Verify Ontario app is what it's called, that you can search for now and download for free. And so there you have it. Now, in some other updates on our government, especially when it comes to reconciliation with Indigenous communities in Canada, in about 2 days, we're going to see if this could be a time we're going to see true movement and actions towards real reconciliation or not. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to get into it. Now, this is a time that we might actually be seeing some sort of actual reconciliation happen, especially when it comes down to child welfare practices that negatively impacted Indigenous communities in the past and even till this present day. So we're going to backtrack a little bit to a couple years ago for more context on this update. In 2019, the CHRT found that Ottawa had discriminated against Indigenous children on reserves by failing to provide funding for child and family services. Now, in the tribunal's ruling, it ordered the government to provide up to 40,000 Canadian dollars to each First Nations child unnecessary taking into care on January 1st, 2006 or later. The order would also require payments to parents or grandparents and children denied essential services. And then a second order in 2020 broadened the eligibility for what's known as a Jordan's Principle. So the principal, named after 5-year-old Jordan River Anderson, who died in hospital in 2005 after a lengthy battle between the federal and Manitoba governments over home care costs, requires that First Nation kids get access to services without delays caused by jurisdictional issues. Now, the tribunal said those eligible for the principal's protections now include children who are registered or eligible to be registered under the Indian Act, children who have parents or guardians registered under the Indian Act, children recognized by their First Nation communities for the purposes of Jordan's principle, and children who are ordinarily resident on a reserve. So previously, it had counted for a child who lived off reserve needed to be registered under the Indian Act in order to be eligible for Jordan's principle, but now the boundary lines have kind of increased with that. Now, so that was 2019, 2020, and then back in June of this year, when the court was hearing the submissions on Ottawa's application for a judicial review of findings from the CHRT, Robert Frater, a lawyer for the Attorney General of Canada, told the court that Canada acknowledges the need to reform its child welfare policies and programs and recognizes that the old policies caused harm. So this was kind of like a resurgence of this recognition, if you will, that Canada has not been holding up the end of the bargain, that it needs to be holding up in terms of taking care of Indigenous children and protecting them the way that the government needs to. He also said that Canada has recognized the need to compensate those who were affected. But he said that the need to redress those wrongs and prevent them from happening again does not justify the tribunal's orders. Mr. Frater said the CHRT's decisions were reached through a flawed chain of reasoning. And in its review application, Ottawa says it believes the tribunal erred by ordering the same monetary compensation to all of the First Nations children, parents, and grandparents. So that's just a feeling. And even Prime Minister Justin Trudeau even said that when the tribunal had originally put this proposition up as the government needed to pay, he said that, that's too much to be asking for, recognizing that, yes, there were errors made in the past and they need to be rectified, but putting that sum of money putting that kind of blame on the government to then foot the bill at the end of the day was a little too much to do. Now, David Nawegabo, a lawyer from the Assembly of First Nations, told the court it is frankly heartless for Canada to be challenging the tribunal's decisions, particularly on compensation, on the basis that there was insufficient evidence to establish harms resulting from the removal of First Nations children from their families, homes, and communities. Sarah Clark, who was representing the First Nations Child and Caring Society, told the court the tribunal quite reasonably found Ottawa was devoid of caution and was willful and reckless with respect to the lives of First Nations children. She went on to say, quote, "We would ask your honor that you really review the record in its entirety, the purpose of the Canadian Human Rights Act and what the tribunal has reasonably done here, which is to compensate Canada's victims of discrimination," end quote. So that's what a lot of people felt, that this was a step that the court was taking in the right direction to adequately compensate victims of what the government had done in the past, especially to the Indigenous community. And this was one step in showing that, the government understands that the way they had handled the situation before was not right and that there was some justice to be served. However, there's one side saying that this is too much justice being served at once, and it's too much pressure to put on the government to pay up front. And then, of course, there's the other side saying that this isn't even enough. Like, this just covers, this portion of it, and that the tribunal's findings were correct, and that Ottawa does need to pay up and pay back those who were impacted. Now, the government's request for a judicial review of the tribunal's findings has sparked political pushback from opposition parties. So in the past, the government had already, appealed the findings. And opposition parties have said that Trudeau's government should put a stop to the legal proceedings because they're not in keeping with its commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous people. That if you're so about truth and reconciliation and actually moving forward and rectifying the wrongs that were done in the past, why would you then go against the tribunal's finding and what they put across as what needs to be done, and that Ottawa should pay up because this is what the tribunal found. And if the government is so invested in making things right with the Indigenous community, this is one step that they can do that. So why fight that? Now, a non-binding motion passed in the House of Commons the week before that hearing that called on the federal government to drop the review. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his cabinet abstained from the vote. And then we had an election, and about a week later, Canada's federal court upheld the Human Rights Tribunal ruling ordering the Canadian government to compensate Indigenous children and families in foster care for suffering and discrimination. So initially, had tried to go against it, and then, we had our election this year, and Truth and Reconciliation was a hot topic, especially because of the unmarked graves that have been found and being discovered over the course of a few months this past summer. It was a hot button topic for a lot of people. And so the courts agreed with the tribunal's ruling, saying that yes, the Canadian government needed to compensate Indigenous children and families for suffering and discrimination. Now, Federal Court Justice Paul Favell rejected the government's appeal and encouraged the two parties to continue negotiating. He wrote in a statement, quote, "No one can seriously doubt that First Nations people are among the most disadvantaged and marginalized members of Canadian society. The tribunal was aware of this and reasonably attempted to remedy the discrimination while being attentive to the very different positions of the parties. In my view, the procedural history of this case has demonstrated that there is and has been goodwill resulting in significant movements towards remedying the unprecedented discrimination. However, the good work of the parties is unfinished." End quote. Now, this then gave the government 30 days, now about 2 days away from that 30-day deadline. It gives them 30 days to appeal this court's ruling and the decision. So essentially, the Liberal government has until October 29th to decide whether it will appeal a landmark ruling from the federal court, which upheld the findings from the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, the CHRT, related to two orders that affect Indigenous children. So deadline is at the end of this week for the government to appeal this ruling. And for a lot of people, they're saying that this will be a mark in history to show whether, once again, the government is going to appeal it and say, no, sorry, this is too much money to pay, or if they're going to bite the bullet and say, okay, fine, we recognize that this is the court's findings, the court's ruling, agree with what the tribunal had ordered before, and this is the step we need to take towards reconciliation, proper reconciliation. Now, representatives of the Canadian Bar Association are officially urging the federal government not to pursue any further legal action against a pair of human rights tribunal decisions that can make Canada liable for billions of dollars in compensation to Indigenous children and families. Billions of dollars is on the line right now for the Canadian government, and for a lot of people, there's some, as I said, there's some sides who are saying that that's too much money right now for the government to be paying up. And then now we have the Canadian Bar Association saying that, federal government should not appeal this and should instead just pay the billions of dollars to compensate Indigenous children and families. Now, legal professionals who belong to the Canadian Bar Association groups devoted to Aboriginal law, youth law, and human rights law sent a letter a couple weeks ago, Friday, to Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller and Justice Minister David Lametti. And it asked the ministers to avoid perpetuating further harm by continuing to challenge CHRT's rulings in this matter. So we're going to dive into the letter just a little bit more here. In the letter, the CBA representatives say that litigation against the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society and the Assembly of First Nations, which filed the complaints that led to the CHRT orders, stands in the way of reconciliation and does not serve the administration of justice. The letter also expressed agreement with comments from Justice Favell that we mentioned earlier, who said that the two sides essentially would have to come to terms and agreements. The letter then said that it is the time to take meaningful steps to address the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. That now is the time that the government can truly take the steps towards proper truth and reconciliation, which is what so many people have been calling for a long time. I mean, this year we had our first Truth and Reconciliation Day, which is an official recognized holiday now in Canada. After so many years of fighting, now we have this day, and not so long after there could be a potential for the government to follow through with this kind of recognition and actually put action behind truth and reconciliation, instead of it just being talking points that we've been hearing at almost every election campaign, at all debates, that we're all constantly talking about what is the government going to do in terms of truth and reconciliation. This might be a step forward, and the CVA is really urging the government not to appeal it and to take the right steps forward in towards proper truth and reconciliation. Just to quote part of the letter, it says, it is best to, quote, find resolution through good faith negotiation rather than further litigation. This is important on behalf of all the children who do not make it home from residential schools and for the Indigenous people who struggle today to address the lingering effects of those injustices. That instead of appealing it and taking it back to court, that it's better to just negotiate with the two different parties, which, as we mentioned, Justice Favel had said the same thing. Now, the government's deliberations over whether to appeal are taking place against a backdrop of increased attention towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in Canada. We know that this past summer, as I mentioned before, the unmarked graves, that more and more and more every week, every day went on, we just kept finding more and more of these unmarked graves, which has put a somber tone on a lot of things when it comes to the fact that these were children. These were human beings that we're finding their graves now. And they weren't even buried in, the way that you truly feel is respectful. They were in unmarked graves that we didn't find until many, many years later. It's a lot for people to take in. And for now to see the government actually being able to take steps and, human rights courts recognizing that there's compensation needs to be made to rectify the wrongs that were done in the past. And there's a potential that our government once again could appeal that decision and say, nope, sorry, this is too much money to be made. It does create for a lot of tension, especially for the Indigenous community who are still fighting till this day to even have proper drinking water, access to fresh fruit and vegetables, that it's such a struggle and it's so expensive because of their isolation from, mainland or sources of food, because the government for so long has neglected these communities. Even though truth and reconciliation has been the forefront of discussion, behind those words there hasn't been enough or a lot of action taken according to the powers that be, and that this was the one step that they could say, like, we're taking some action towards proper reconciliation, towards proper justice for Indigenous peoples. Now, when Indigenous Service Minister Mark Miller's office did not comment on the letter. Instead, it pointed to a government statement from the day the federal court handed down its decision. The statement says Canada is reviewing the decision and that further information will be forthcoming. I mean, it's not that long away, about 2 days away from the deadline of the appeal. Mr. Miller had previously said his department is moving forward on a compensation model for Indigenous people who suffered the types of discrimination covered by the tribunal's orders. He has also said that the private discussions are happening related to 2 class action lawsuits that deal with compensation for Indigenous children. So things are happening behind closed doors, according to Mr. Miller here. But especially pointing to the fact that discussions are happening about payments and compensation, how that could work. Having a model obviously will be something that is being put in place. Of course, the government can't just work over that sum of money at once. That it probably will be have a compensation or payment plan, probably similar to our taxes being paid out. When you get those benefits back and they send you those monthly checks in the mail, but something along those lines. Just as long as those who have been impacted and those who have been affected, those who have been discriminated against, those who have suffered at the hands of the government, especially when it comes to children and families who fit within the parameters for this particular case, they will be compensated. I think at the end of the day, that's all folks want to see the government saying is like, yes, we will compensate those who have been impacted and who have suffered greatly during this time. Now, Cindy Blackstock, who is the executive director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society, said that her sense, based on Mr. Trudeau's most recent public statements, is that the government is going to appeal. So this is just her feeling on it. If the government does decide to fight the court's ruling, she said, quote, it would be beyond disappointing. Every time they do this, the victims are the children and the families. That's what is always on my mind. They continue hurting people. So this is from Miss Blackstock, who has said this, end quote. Now, just speaking on her words, that at the end of the day, the people who will be losing out on, who will continue suffering, are those who were ideally able to receive the compensation, who were within the parameters that the government had placed with the Jordan's Principle or with the Indian Care Act. Those who would be receiving the compensation, if the government chooses to appeal the decision, they will be the ones missing out on justice for their suffering and for their discrimination. NDP MP Charlie Angus, who has been outspoken throughout the CHRT case, told the Globe it's very concerning that the federal government has not said it will accept the federal court's ruling yet, saying, quote, "The ruling was damning and threw out every single one of the government's argument. They need to do the right thing. That's it. End of story." He also added that an appeal would result in Mr. Trudeau's credibility on reconciliation being finished forever. As I mentioned before, it's been a lot of talk on reconciliation. You know, we hear a lot of the apologies and the we need to do better. We as Canadians need to do better. We as Canadians need to do better. And now that, you know, legally speaking, the government has been held up to a standard of actually doing better and actually putting their money where their mouth is, right? Literally, that if you truly do want reconciliation, now is the time to accept what the courts are saying, not appeal it, and pay the compensation. Otherwise, as Mr. Angus said, quote, "Mr. Trudeau's credibility on reconciliation will be finished forever." Now, Jamie Schmally, who's Conservative MP for Haliburton Kawartha Lakes Brock, said in a statement that the Liberal government has spent years on this, quote, "shameful court battle," and that reconciliation must be achieved in partnership with communities. That there's no way you can find true reconciliation if you're not working hand in hand with the communities that have suffered at the hands of the discrimination. Which is a fair point to make, right? You want to work within these communities. You want to know what it is they need to start being more successful, to feel that they are really truly being supported by the government. That these things can't happen without consideration, without collaboration with the communities that have been directly impacted and directly affected, that have been grieving for centuries, for decades, and grieving all over again, now with the unmarked graves re-earthing, if you will. That these are the people that need to be considered first and foremost when making these decisions. That it shouldn't always go back to, you know, the government's plans to move forward for them specifically. It shouldn't always be a personal political thing. It should be because there are people who have suffered by choices made by the government in the past, and now this is a way to make up for it. So let's go through with that. Now, Ms. Blackstock said the Indigenous leaders who were present at the Tekumloops Teshowamuk First Nation last Monday, actually, along with the Prime Minister, raised this case with him specifically, and that they stressed the need for the government to end litigation in order to prove that it is committed to reconciliation. She said Ottawa needs to, quote, "put down its sword. It needs to stop fighting reconciliation. It needs to understand that when First Nation children win, the country wins too." So last Monday, Prime Minister Trudeau, went to visit the Tekumloops Teshowamuk First Nations to offer an apology. He apologized in person to Indigenous leaders after skipping a remembrance for victims and survivors of residential schools on Truth and Reconciliation Day. Now, Trudeau visited the First Nations to offer his apologies to Chief Roseanne Kismere for missing the first ever National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which was approved by Canada's Parliament in spring. Now, the Prime Minister reportedly did not acknowledge invitations to attend the September 30th ceremony, and instead, the community learned from a journalist that on the day, the Prime Minister, whose official itinerary placed him in private meetings in Ottawa, was in fact on vacation with his family in Tofino, Vancouver Island. So they found out that Prime Minister wasn't where he said he was going to be, and instead took the day off to spend it with his family. And so he had to come back and apologize for not showing up for the Indigenous communities on the specific day that is essentially meant for all Canadians to show up for Indigenous communities. He said in his speech Quote, I'm here today to say I wish I'd been here a few weeks ago, and I deeply regret it. Instead of talking about truth and reconciliation, people talked about me, and that's on me. I take responsibility for that. Now, there are a lot of people who are saying that that's not enough. I mean, this was the first ever Truth and Reconciliation Day. This is one of the first steps to actually recognize the need for reconciliation on a national scale. Like this was things that had been planned in the past. You know, he knew the day was going to come up as of spring when Parliament had accepted the day, had put it forward as an actual day to take off. It was essentially a holiday. And instead of spending it with the communities to discuss how Canada can, you know, work towards better reconciliation, he instead went to go spend the time with his family. Now, the Tekumloops to Sewepmuk Nation is located near one school in Kamloops, British Columbia, where the unmarked graves of 215 children were discovered in May. Now, more bodies have been found in other Indigenous communities, and the Canadian government has acknowledged that thousands of children died of diseases and other causes. So the September 30th being Truth and Reconciliation Day was a day to commemorate, to grieve, to honor those who had lost their lives, to show respect to those who will continue to fight for equality, for reconciliation for Indigenous communities here in Canada. And so, of course, they were rightfully upset that the Prime Minister did not show up and instead chose to go on vacation. And they didn't find out through him. They found out through the media, taking pictures and reporting on it. So, of course, you know, the Prime Minister had to apologize for that and had to show face and, you know, do what he needed to do. He also reportedly said that during the visit that the government has not yet decided whether to appeal the federal court's rulings. He reiterated the government's frequent assurance that it remains committed to compensating First Nations children. So this is what he said during his apology tour meeting with Indigenous leaders, to discussing this, whether the government will be planning to appeal. Him saying that he remains committed and the government remains committed to compensating First Nations children is all well and good, if we actually see that action coming to fruition, actually seeing that happen, provided that they don't appeal again. Now we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we're back, we're going to discuss the significance of truth and reconciliation for us here in Canada. Stay tuned.
Canada's #1 African barbecue, the Suya Spot. Serving and satisfying your Suya needs from multiple locations across the GTA, including Scarborough, Toronto, Woodbridge, and Mississauga. Also located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Visit any location today or stay home and order through
DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Skip the Dishes.
For more information, check out our website at www.thesuyaspot.com or call the toll-free line at +1 866 448 7892. The Suya Spot. You built it, now use it. Vous l'avez construit, utilisez-le. Do you want to be your own boss and make income or extra income with flexible schedule? Welcome to Keenan Courier. Keenan Courier works as a marketplace platform connecting customers who need something delivered with drivers that are willing to serve them. Courier with any vehicle, better trip allocation, and cash out your earnings whenever you want. Download our driver apps today to sign up.
Hello and welcome back to the Chat Up Show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aloyde, and today we're discussing whether Canada's government, or Canada in general, is finally moving towards true reconciliation with Indigenous communities here in Canada. Now, before we went on the break, I had mentioned that the Canadian Bar Association had written a letter to the federal government urging them not to appeal the CHRT's ruling that the government is required to compensate Indigenous children and families for suffering and discrimination. Now, in the letter, it also pays homage to the fact that the TRC, which is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, had spent 6 years examining the impacts of government-funded, church-run residential schools where thousands of Indigenous children had died and many were abused. Now, 6 years of findings, and then fast forward that to the tribunal finally recognizing and saying, yes, this does require some compensation. First round, government appealing it, going to the higher courts, the federal court saying, yes, the government is required to compensate children for what went on for decades in these church-run residential schools, in government-funded family services and care services, in where thousands of children had died and many were abused physically, sexually, mentally, all of the above. To finally receive that recognition is a step in the right direction from our federal courts. But next step, as we know, is on the federal government, whether they really truly will actually compensate the children for their suffering and their discrimination. As I mentioned again earlier, the letter had said that it's best to find resolution through good faith negotiation rather than further litigation. And Justice Faval also encouraged the government essentially to, instead of, going through litigation, going through the court processes, to instead negotiate. Maybe if they feel that, as they said before, that the compensation was a little too much. I mean, we're looking at about 2 billion Canadian dollars here, $40,000 per child. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money to put out. It's a lot of money that maybe the government is wondering where it's coming from. I mean, we're somewhat coming up out of the tail end of a pandemic, slowly starting to find our footing. We're slowly starting to fully reopen in certain areas. Things are slowly starting to, level out a little bit after a few years. But now is the best time as ever to actually take steps towards reconciliation. Before the break, I'd mentioned how Prime Minister Trudeau had to go and apologize to Indigenous leaders for the lack of his presence, if you will, on September 30th, which was the first ever Truth and Reconciliation Day, official day, recognized here in Canada. Instead of spending the time discussing how Canada can truly move towards truth and reconciliation, we were talking about how Justin Trudeau was on vacation with his family. Now, these were his own words during the apology, saying that, it should have been a day that we were talking about true reconciliation for Indigenous communities that have suffered here in Canada, here under government-funded and government-led services and organizations and foundations and church-run schools. Instead of talking about how we can move forward from that and actually finding justice and seeking out justice, instead the conversation was still placed on Mr. Justin Trudeau's lack of presence on the day of, and instead he took the opportunity to take a vacation. Now, for a lot of people, they're seeing this as our leader, the leader of Canada, the leader who has talked a lot about truth and reconciliation, the leader who has discussed why it's important for us to move towards reconciliation, why it's important for us to actively work towards rebuilding the Indigenous communities here in Canada, then taking the opportunity not to do so, and then again hearing about the fact that he appealed the tribunal's ruling in orders to compensate children and families who were deeply impacted. Then again, to hear that the court's ruling is saying that, there's another 30 days, but we agree with the tribunal's findings and that it is necessary for Ottawa to compensate these children and their families. And we're so close to the deadline with the 30-day deadline that has been put in place, ending October 29th, and still waiting to hear from our federal government on what they plan to do. Trudeau did say, as I mentioned before, he did mention that the government is still committed to compensating First Nations children, that it is still important and vital for them to continue working towards reconciliation, that the government's continue to assure Canadians and the communities deeply impacted that it still remains committed towards this. So this first step towards truth and reconciliation is so important, and we're wondering if this will be a chance for the government to finally go towards true reconciliation and say, yes, we have done wrong. Yes, we should have been working towards this in the past, and that it's important for us to see what needs to be done, hear what needs to be done according to the court's ruling, according to the tribunal's ruling, and actively work towards compensating those who've been impacted and those who've been deeply affected by it. I mean, we just celebrated our first Truth and Reconciliation Day. That in itself is monumental, that now we have a day to recognize why it's important for us to talk about what's going on in our indigenous communities. I mentioned before that there's so many communities now who aren't able to have proper drinking water, who don't have access to affordable fresh fruits and vegetables, that the prices are marked so high because everything needs to be flown in and there isn't as much access to these resources as there should be. And it makes you wonder, why not? Why isn't this part of the government's plan towards proper reconciliation? Why is this still going on in the 21st century? Like, we all have to know that, yes, these communities have suffered. They've suffered for a very long time and at the hands of our government. So why is it taking so long for our government to finally take the steps forward? Of course, we recognize how much money is at stake here. I mean, billions of dollars, we know. Understandable. It's understandable why the government will be like, we need to figure out where to get the funds. But there was the proposition of, working towards a compensation model, a compensation plan. It's not like you're giving a lump sum out to communities or folks who were impacted and heavily impacted, who had suffered, who had dealt with discrimination, who had dealt with the abuse, who are still healing from that trauma that these folks have had to go through at the hands of government funding, lack of government funding, if you will, lack of government care as well, if we want to go there. And to constantly hear from our government and even to see physically the choices that are being made, as if to say that, reconciliation with the indigenous community is not a top priority or is not as much of a top priority as has been discussed previously or has been campaigned for previously. That we're still seeing in real time our government or our leader, Prime Minister, make choices that still do not put the indigenous communities first, that do not prioritize their livelihoods, does not prioritize their wellness, does not prioritize reconciliation, does not prioritize justice. So for now, we know that we're about 2 days away from the deadline of appeal, and so many organizations. I mean, the Canadian Bar Association is encouraging the government to negotiate rather than appeal and take it back to court. Justice Favell is encouraging negotiation as opposed to appealing and not taking it back to court. So maybe this is time for the government to listen and hear. Even Miss Blastock, Cindy, says that, this is a time for the government to actually take some action and move forward and take the steps that are necessary towards reconciliation. So maybe it's time that, the government does listen to those leaders within our communities, leaders within Canada as well, who are urging for negotiation towards compensation as opposed to appealing against it. Because, yes, but feels better than a flat out no, right? Like, you want to hear a yes, but this is what we can do right now. Yes, but this is how much money we can pay off right now. Yes, but this is the limit that we have towards compensation for however many years, as opposed to no, sorry, that's too much money. We can't pay that much. And then it goes again and having to be brought up, and we're going to be talking about it again 2 years down the line like we did the first time, or a year down the line like we did with the second court case. It's a lot of conversation that's going on around what our government is actually going to do when it comes to reconciliation. Are we actually going to move closer towards true reconciliation than we had in the past? Of course, we'll always keep you updated right here on the GBKM network, but for now, this is just what's going on for us right here at home in Canada, and something that could be very monumental. I mean, this could be the step in the direction that so many people have been waiting for. I mean, today I'm sporting orange in solidarity with the Indigenous communities, that every child matters, that every missing child, every missing woman, every unmarked grave that is found, recognizing that that was someone who had hopes and dreams and was looking towards a future that would be filled with justice, a brighter future, if you will. Children who have had to go through this discrimination, who were removed from their safe homes, if you will, because of discrimination, and put into systems that were not there to support, were not there to uplift, were not there to empower, were not there to encourage, were there to, just keep you at bay, if you will. That this community deserves the recognition. It deserves the respect of actually showing up on a day that's dedicated towards talking about the traumas that they face and faced, continue to face, live through on a day-to-day basis. I mean, even down south, there's so much that's going on regarding pipeline protests. And so much more is being unearthed when it comes to the trauma that indigenous communities still face till this day. How many children are taken still? How many are missing? How many have been murdered as well? And it's not making mainstream media. It's not being talked about as much. I mean, the graves that were found it's the mass of them that really got us talking about it. That in days we were finding up to 700 in a day, up to 700 in a week, up to thousands of them within the month. That the more we found, the more we dug, the more we found of these unmarked graves. And it just goes to show like how much more is behind the doors of what really went on, what harm was truly inflicted on these communities that has led to thousands of people who didn't even know what had happened to their children or family members until this year. Because now they found those graves, they found where the bodies were buried. So people are really urging the government to really consider what has gone on, what is part of Canada's history. We cannot ignore it. It is part of Canadian history. It's part of Canadian modern history, in fact. It's not that far ago. 1996 wasn't that long ago. At all. Where residential schools were still a thing. Was not that long ago. It's still considered modern history. So I think putting that into context and really picturing that it was not that long ago, and yet we're still fighting for just even recognition and finally getting it with a day, a national day, you know, where we do recognize the trauma that Indigenous communities have been put through. But now to actually compensate, reparations, true reparations for communities, for people who are still alive to receive it. Because we remember that part of the case was that for children who had been essentially dealing with the discrimination as of January 1st, 2006. 2006, do the math, that's about 15 years ago. So they're still alive, they're still able to receive the money, they're still able to receive this justice. We're not talking about people from centuries ago, we're not talking about people from the 50 or 60 years ago even. Folks who are still young in, I guess, the subjective sense, enough to remember and young enough to talk about it and young enough to still receive justice for the pain that they suffered. So as I said before, this could be a step towards true truth and reconciliation for the Canadian government here today. Now, before I let you go, just want to remind you as well of our Ontario vaccine verification. For those who are also just joining us, supposedly, you can now download the Verify Ontario mobile app, which will provide you the vaccine certification for you to then show as proof of vaccination when you go to your gyms, your bars, your restaurants, your cinemas, your event spaces that require it, your meeting spaces that require it. Now, of course, I want to reiterate that the provincial government did say that this was a temporary measure, that there may come a time where showing proof of vaccination will not be necessary anymore. But until then, this is what will be required. Always need a proof of ID as well to go along with the proof of vaccination, just to, you know, verify that you are the same person. Also, just remember, you can also continue to use your vaccination receipt if for whatever reason you do not want to use the online version. You can also continue to use your doctor's notes or registered nurse notes to prove that you are exempted from being fully vaccinated until they can, the province will then be able to integrate that into the Verify Ontario app. So for now, you have to continue using your official doctor's note to prove that you are exempted from being fully vaccinated to be allowed into establishments or businesses or organizations that require a proof of vaccine upon entry. Again, as well, it's available in French and English. If you are not fully vaccinated, you will not be allowed entry. It will not come up as, you know, accepted for entry. You will not get the check mark that will show that you are allowed, according to your vaccine status, to enter the business or establishment. So make sure you are fully vaccinated first, no half doses. If you had been vaccinated outside of Ontario and you are needing the Ontario proof of vaccination, you can call up your public health unit, or you can call the Provincial Vaccine Contact Center at 1-833-943-3900, which is also on the ontario.ca website as well for you to check out if need be. And with that, that concludes our Chat Up show for today. You can always keep up with us on the GBKM network by listening and watching live 24/7 at www.gbkm.tv or www.gbkm.fm. You can also download our free app today. It's available for all iOS and Android devices. Just search GBKM in the App Store or the Google Play Store to download it for free. You'll be notified every time we go live. You can catch up on past shows and take us on the go with you everywhere you go. Make sure to continue keeping up with us on Facebook and YouTube at GBKM Network, where you can like, share, comment, and subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at GBKM Network for updates on what's going on with us right here at GBKM. And you can follow me, your host, on Instagram and Twitter at TIS_Liz_O. And with that, I will see you the same time, same place next week. Take care.
Do you want to be your own boss and make income or extra income with flexible schedule? Welcome to Keenan Courier. Keenan Courier works as a marketplace platform connecting customers who need something delivered with drivers that are willing to serve them. Courier with any vehicle, better trip allocation, and cash out your earnings whenever you want. Download our driver apps today to sign up. Canada's #1 African barbecue, the Suya Spot. Serving and satisfying your Suya needs from multiple locations across the GTA, including Scarborough, Toronto, Woodbridge, and Mississauga. Also located in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Visit any location today or stay home and order through
DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Skip the Dishes.
For more information, check out our website at www.thesuyaspot.com or call the toll-free line at +1 866 448 7892. The Suya Spot. You built it, now use it. Vous l'avez construit, utilisez-le. Canada's #1 African barbecue, the Suya Spot. Serving and satisfying your Suya needs from multiple locations across the GTA, including Scarborough,